Methinks as I see Abram returning from the slaughter of the 4 kings, I see in him a picture of a greater than Abram returning from Edom, with dyed garments from Bozrah, traveling in the greatness of his strength. Who answers to my inquiry who he is? I that speak in righteousness, mighty to save. Abram was that righteous man raised up in the east, to whom God gave his enemies as driven stubble to his bow. And so the Lord Jesus has driven our enemies like chaff over to the wind. For they fled at the presence of Jehovah Jesus. And by the valor of the atoning Lamb they have been utterly broken in pieces forever. Let that thought dwell with you, it may furnish you with matter for meditation at your leisure. We shall this morning rather consider Abram as the type and picture of all the faithful. He was the father of the faithful. And in his history you have condensed, as I think, the history of all faithful men. You will scarcely find a trial which will befall you, which has not in some respect happened unto Abraham. I will not say that he was tempted in all points like as we are, but he was tempted in so many points that he well deserves to be called the father of the faithful, being partaker of flesh and blood, even as all the children are who belong to his faithful family. Observe then, in handling our subject in this manner, that believers are frequently engaged in warfare. Notice, secondly, that when they are thus engaged, they may expect to be met by their Lord, the great Melchizedek, and remember, thirdly, that when they are favored with an interview with him, and are refreshed by him as with bread and wine, then, like Abram, they consecrate themselves anew, and, as Abram gave tithes of all, even so do they. We mention then what you must all know right well by experience, you who are God's people, that the believer is often engaged in warfare. This warfare will be both within and without, within with the innumerable natural corruptions which remain, with the temptations of Satan, with the suggestions of his own wicked heart. And without, he will frequently be engaged in warfare, wrestling not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. The peculiar case of Abram leads me to remark that sometimes the believer will be engaged in warfare, not so much on his own account as on the account of erring brethren, who, having gone into ill company, are by and by carried away captive. It was no quarrel of Abram's, it was Lot's matter. Lot had gone to Sodom, instead of standing in the separated path of the true believer. He had joined himself unto the world. And when evil days came, Lot was carried away captive with the rest. Abram cared little enough for the king of Sodom. I do not suppose he would have taken his sword from the sheath for all the men who dwelt in Admah or Zeboim, but for Lot's sake, seeing him in ill company and in danger, he draws the sword. And sometimes, brethren, when we see those who are God's servants putting themselves into alliance with evil systems, we find them carried away captive and taken where we believe their hearts would never go, and we feel compelled to come out and draw the sword against the common enemy of Christ and of all his people. And though they may heartily wish that we would let them alone in their sin, and let them be quiet in their evil union, we see into what spiritual capacity it letteth them. And we cannot be silent, but must draw the sword when conscience and when God demand it, and never sheath it until God's work is done. However, this rarely occurs. For the most part, the Christian spends his sword's edge upon his own spiritual foes, and truly we have enough of these. What with pride, sloth, lust, what with the archenemy of souls, and his insinuations and blasphemies, what with the lust of the eye, the pleasures of this world, and the pride of life, what with enemies who come upon us even from providence in the shape of temptations arising out of our trials and our vocations. We ought to carry our sword always drawn, and, above all, we should ever carry the shield of faith and take the weapon of all prayer.